Welcome to Crypto Disrupted, a cryptocurrency and blockchain podcast with your hosts, Trent Lipinski and Greg Kerr.
Welcome to Crypto Disrupted. I'm Trent Lipinski, and this is my co-host, Greg Kerr, and we've got a very special guest on today. We've got David Smooke from MI Publications, most notably HackerNoon, which is a publication that Greg and I have been writing a lot for lately. Hey, David, how's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on your show. And I also wanted to make sure to thank you guys for contributing to HackerNoon. Some great stories that we published with you.
Thanks for having us. It's been awesome writing for you. I just started writing again just a couple of years ago. And, you were one of the first publications to kind of like reach out and say, I want to publish your stuff, man. I was like, all right, like I will accept a bigger audience.
Yeah, it's good writing. I mean, you cover a lot of like, your life, which has been, some very interesting experiences. And then more recently, a lot of kind of pushing crypto and where crypto meets social good that I find very interesting and exciting.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome, and I've been really enjoying Greg's series. So thank you for allowing Greg to kind of come out of the wheelhouse, because he didn't have a social media following before this. I don't know if you know this or not, but Greg, due to his career with the Pentagon and everything, he had no social media following before this. So I was telling him, I was like, you got to go on Medium. You got to publish. I know this guy, David, and he'll publish your stuff. Like, you're a good writer, Greg. Like, you'll be able to handle this. And, he used to write, he doesn't like to talk about it, but he used to write, Intel briefings and stuff like that. So,
yeah. What is an Intel briefing like? Can you describe some of your most popular and well-read Intel briefings, please?
Oh, no, seriously. Actually, I probably can. Summarize Al Jazeera. How about that? I just kind of take what the news is saying and repackage it for executives.
Yeah, presidents getting their news on the TV is it's the de facto way to do it.
Yeah, there's some utility in that the news gives, and this is relevant to you because you're a newsman that pushes out this information, and how it influences executives and policymakers is a big deal. I remember being at the Pentagon and started to notice there was an admiral that I was working for, and I started noticing that his questions had a lot to do with what was talked about on NPR on my way into work. So I asked his executive assistant, I'm like, hey, does the admiral listen to NPR? They're like, yep. And I'm like, all right. And then the whole team started having to listen to NPR every morning, make sure we were ahead and understanding where our policymaker was getting his news. And once again, not only, is how fresh news is for policymakers, but also being unclassified allows them to speak more openly around it. So sometimes, classified information clogged up in your head and you're an executive at that level and you're handling things, you don't want to spill it out. So some of the guys would limit their exposure to classified information and keep it in the unclassified realm. So the news is really influential, and it sounds, I can make it a joke, but it really does have its role in informing and putting everybody on the same page. And Al Jazeera and a few other Middle Eastern outlets are one of those things that got the conversation literally at the same page among, a lot of people in defense.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the awesome things that, David's doing here is, you're essentially an independent media organization. So can you kind of explain like how your organization started and, what you do and how you kind of like crowdsource all these different journalists from around the internet? It's kind of amazing. Can you go into it and explain it for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a starting point is that you get closer to the truth by publishing many different voices as opposed to publishing one voice and propping it up higher and higher. So that's kind of always an assumption I took in my operations of just like, it's much better to have 10 different people have their perspective of what coin's going to grow and why than to have one really smart people. And then the same thing applies as you move to 100 and 1,000 and 10,000 different voices. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me. But with my company, and actually backing up right before I started my own company, I was with a recruiting technology company, and with their corporate blog, I opened it up to anyone that was an expert on recruiting. And the idea there was, if I can host any audience that's talking about my primary word, Oh, my phone rang. I'm sorry, guys.
No worries.
No.
I'm not going to answer it. This is a newsroom. This stuff happens all the time. I do work from home about half the time now. But this breakthrough of just talking about the keyword as opposed to saying you have to plug our product in the blog post, which is how most corporate blogs work, was something that I learned there by doing and having the goal of becoming an expert on the subject matter as opposed to, pushing the product more. So I took that when I left that company and I went to my own venture, we actually started as a marketing firm. And we would represent, I was just trying to basically go through my network in San Francisco and represent the brightest startup founders I knew. And my goal was partially selfishly to learn from them and see how, they run their own business and make their marketing better, make their voice better, make their story more compelling, make their story wider and have a wider audience. And from that, I started my own corporate blog that became Art Plus Marketing, which was the first blog I hosted on Medium when they started publications. And that blog, a lot of people started to want to contribute to it. And I found that in reaching out to people to contribute, they were very responsive. And they were like, it's great to have this brand and this person behind my writing. And then readers were like, it's so cool to publish where I read. So, anytime you create a new reader, you have the potential to create a new writer, which was, it's really cool because I do believe that everyone is a writer. And that's becoming more and more true as there's more and more places on the internet to put your writing. Suddenly, why would you put an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours into something if there's nowhere to read it? And if the people that do read it, you're not sure if they liked it or not, and you're not sure how many people read it. So as the internet's grown, it's been, I think the idea that people have their own voice and their own perspective on the things happening in the world is much more valid. And then the writer themselves can see how valid it is, which encourages the behavior and creates a very nice circle. And with the publications, it was working well. And basically I did a pivot of moving from marketing firm where, I'm actually paid by the word that I write and I'm paid by the hour to growing my own media, mainly because our corporate blog was growing. And I like the stories more than I like pushing a product. So it selfishly, again, made sense of like, this is the direction I want to move my business. It's growing very fast in terms of traffic, but not so fast in terms of money. But I wanted to bet on myself and bet on my interest and bet on my gut. And that's whenever we opened up the 16 different publications and kind of see and said, you can write about almost anything with us. Whether you want to talk about politics on Extra Newsfeed, technology on HackerNoon, feminism on Athena Talks. There was an outlet where we had a place that was growing a community in that the other writers were basically all bringing in readers. I was bringing in readers. And then so each new writer benefits from that past work. And each new writer also contributes to that by bringing a small portion of their community. So that's kind of the incentives that are at play in a network like this. And the big thing to remember is, and that I always keep in mind, is that it is all accumulative. And I'm always looking for new ways to have people find our stories, but I'm also always valuing Google and saying, how can our stories and content be found better in Google? I think that's the best long-term play that a publisher can do. Relying on different algorithms like Facebook's newsfeed, LinkedIn's newsfeed, Medium's newsfeed, they could change it tomorrow. They do change it all the time and they do tweak it all the time. So it's not that I don't want to have traffic from those sources, but once it's a newsfeed, it's someone else is choosing the order of the stories, and their incentives can change if they hire a new person. Like that moment they hire that new person, the incentives change, boom, different. Yeah. And as opposed to saying I'm searching for a problem or I'm searching for trends on this, and being in Google News, which was kind of a nice milestone for HackerNoon. It's kind of like HackerNoon does something, then the other publications try and follow. Like HackerNoon is always the one doing it first, which is like, to me, a perfect metaphor for the tech industry. It's like tech does it first and then the other industries try and follow, which is like what's happening with my publications.
And talk about the numbers. So like you've grown this thing fairly organically, and you've got some massive numbers now. Can you kind of go into the numbers a little bit?
Yeah, I can give you kind of a brief overview. We've had over 20,000 different writers contribute across the publications. For the last 3 months, we've been over 10 million page views a month, which is kind of a nice milestone that people can understand. I do value, as a company, I value time reading more than page views, but in communicating the scale of media, you still have to talk in page views, and that's how it works. And then we have about 600,000 people that are subscribed to the content and across the different publications. So that's kind of the high level scale of what we operate on. And HackerNoon is it's about 70% of the total network, and it's growing. HackerNoon, we've opened up partnerships with Quora, the Next Web, and Fast Company, where we republish each other's top content on each site, which is it's very nice that like HackerNoon brand has reached the point where like it can be looked at on equals with those other sites. At least they will, as opposed to like don't answer my email, which is what is like in the beginning of creating a news outlet.
That's hilarious. And actually, so I started getting on HackerNoon, what was it, probably 4 or 5 months ago now? No, longer than that.
Yeah.
It must,
Maybe
yeah.
Yeah. So, and here's the thing is, so I started noticing that I was ahead of the news, especially in the tech industry. So I'd read something on HackerNoon, then a couple weeks or something like that, you might see it in Vox, the concept or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then, oh man, if I catch, something on mainstream media or CBS Sunday Morning, I can start going back, and I started catching, I'm like, man, I'm 3 months ahead of tech news, because of just every day doing my daily reading in HackerNoon. And now as I'm, as we're going through and pursuing this coin, I was sitting there and I'm like, anybody I come across that isn't publishing in Medium or specifically in HackerNoon, I'll kind of sit there and go, why not? And then everybody around me, I'm starting to encourage. I'm like, hey, your ideas need to be documented here. This is kind of the pool and the nexus where, leaders and ideas and people that are organizing are coming together and posting these views. And so you're starting to see global. I've made friends all around the world through HackerNoon as writers and readers and corresponding with the people that are commenting on my articles. And it's been amazing, especially being in the blockchain world where this is a new tech that it's, the tech itself is about collaboration. So the people involved with it at this point are about collaboration. And I feel like HackerNoon is one of those meeting spots where we all there's a commonality among people in this industry. So appreciate your work on it. And it's been a huge value to not only my professional career, but also the enrichment of my life.
That's very flattering to hear. It's like, geez, I do get up and work for some reason. It's valuing someone's life and something is changing.
Yeah, no, I was excited when Trent told me you agreed to come onto the show. I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's head must be huge. Like just the exposure. Because I noticed that you read my articles and I'm sitting here and I'm like, man, who am I? If he's got the time and the discipline to be going through my stuff, and he's got that on his whole life, like you've probably got a pretty good. Yeah, there's a good question in that. What is your day like? Your mornings as you're drinking coffee?
The mornings basically are entirely reserved for reading and editing. And it's part of the internal goal I've created for myself is that I want my story submissions to be as good as the news I would just read on the internet. So I keep trying to do these things where like it's creating incentives where like the things I read in the morning would just be the best of the internet and they happen to be story submissions to my site. So that's like the internal thing driving this loop where, what I'm doing every morning. And I basically only schedule one meeting a day, never more than one because I'm trying to meetings. It's funny. I left San Francisco now like 14 months ago. And in that time, we've basically 10x traffic. And it's mainly because I've eliminated distractions. Like I only meet, like I'm meeting with you guys because like this is awesome. I'm very supportive of Crypto Disruptive. I like what you guys are doing. And this is my meeting of the day. The other hours I'm working are all, my projects and my work. And I also believe like most meetings like should be done in email. And with email, that's like, that should eliminate 90% of the meetings. It's like, I don't really need to hear all your reasonings of why you're doing X and Y. I just need to know what you're doing and when and how that relates to what I'm doing. And so like that type of stuff is like that I've gotten much better at it actually as I've isolated myself more, which may be counterintuitive, but has definitely worked for me. It's also, you got to fit your personality to your work in, whatever way you can, and figure out how to get more out of yourself.
That's a really good point. And I was going to echo that. I'm running a company in West Africa, and there's times where the only communique I'll have for weeks is over Facebook chat. And, my guys aren't great at expressing themselves in Word, so using chats has been a really quick communique between me and them, and things happen, right? And I was just like, wow, I left the government. I stopped going to meetings about meetings to have meetings. And, and I can get things done and executed in very difficult situations over chat, and using chat text, not even complete sentences is the best form of communication I have in my life. And and then on the other end, I'm still stuck in the other end of this where I still do 2-page emails to Trent. And then
3-hour phone calls. Yeah.
And then Trent sometimes still makes me feel like a Neanderthal because he's still on this quick communique.
I do both. I'm awful because I'll be on the phone with someone, I'll be having a conversation, I'll be on Slack, I'll be on Facebook chat, I'll be like just multitasking, communicating with like 5 or 6 people, maintaining like multiple conversations at the same time. And I've just learned how to do that growing up on the internet, being online since I was in 4th grade, like having 5 instant messages going and being in a chat room at the same time, like kind of program my brain to be able to do that. But the benefits of being able to, use instant messaging, being able to use email, being able to use project management software. I mean, when I ran CyberChimps, when I ran my own startup and I was CEO, I probably will never have those 3 letters after my name again. When I was doing all of that, I was managing 20 people, and I couldn't have done it without Slack. I couldn't have done it without project management software. It's amazing how much you can actually get done just by having text-to-text conversations and just using the written word. And when I first got back into writing,
which is 95% of my product, is people reading and sharing the written word. So I think working that way is good. It fits, working exactly how your product is.
Well, when I was getting back into writing, I had this moment after I sold my startup, right? And I was like, do I go learn another programming language? Like part of me was like thinking, oh yeah, maybe I should go learn another programming language. I'll try to, learn something new. And then I realized I should double down on English. And that's what the moment was, where I was like, if there's any language I need to perfect, it's this one, so that I can learn to communicate more effectively with people. So HackerNoon and you publishing my work was a great way for me to get that initial audience again, because I had stopped writing for almost 10 years. I don't know if you know, but I ran an Apple News and Rumor site early on.
On the way, I was just in a drive and I listened to your first podcast. I listened to episode 1, the origin story.
Yeah, so I was a publisher. I was doing what you're doing, way back in the early internet, early 2000s. So, we didn't even call them blogs back then. The terminology for this stuff didn't even exist yet. So I'd been in publishing. I'd written thousands of articles. I did that for 5 years straight and completely burnt out. So I stopped writing. I had a tech column on Suicide Girls for a little while. And then I just pieced out. I did not write for another 10 years. So it wasn't until you started publishing my work 10 years later that, I started to really get an audience again and kind of start to explore how to perfect my writing and how to communicate more effectively.
Did you have any old readers from Suicide Girl and your tech blog that came back and were like, I missed you?
Kind of. I have actually. I've had old people reach out to me who saw my work again recently. I mean, there was that one article, I know I didn't let you have it. I had that one after the election that went totally viral.
The election was such a shit show. None of the news outlets knew what to do. No one knew. And it's just you wrote a great one.
Well, and I figured out that I realized in that moment that I had an opportunity, because I knew that no one was going to show up to work the next day and be paying attention. So I knew if I published the night of the election, that I had a chance of getting in front of the news cycle because I was the first one to publish. So I knew there wasn't going to be anybody to counteract my propaganda, essentially, because, you know, all these propaganda outlets had been controlling the entire election. Well, they all had their guard down the night of the election. So by publishing when I did, I got past all the algorithms, and that's how I was able to go viral. There was just a brief moment where had I published that 3 hours later, it probably wouldn't have gone viral. But because I had published it when I did, there was no one there to stop it.
I mean, you should also put a little more faith in your words. I mean, a lot of people were feeling that night.
Yeah.
You know, and the night of the election, in the morning, watching Hillary's concession speech, and it was just like there was a little bit of if you could tap into like how surreal and not real this is, and do it with logic and explain it clearly, like how it was fucked up. It was like a lot of people needed to read that day. So I guess timing was important.
And for context, this is your article about the idea of Donald Trump using artificial intelligence.
No. This is a different article. That was later. This is my Dear Democrats letter. So I wrote a letter to Democrats explaining to them what happened with WikiLeaks, and explained to them, you know, how there was this opportunity to kind of look into the Hillary Clinton campaign and look at what a potentially corrupt politician looks like. You know, because her campaign chairman's emails leaked, because her emails leaked, we got to look into the behind the scenes of, you know, a political candidate running for president. Like as a citizen, we've never had that opportunity before. That was a rare opportunity to get a glimpse into that. And most people didn't read the emails. And I was a crazy person who just sat there reading these emails like for like 3 months straight. Like I just was reading WikiLeaks like every spare moment I had. I was just going through the Podesta emails. I was going through Hillary's emails. Like it was fascinating to me because I got to learn from master politicians. Like I said, like having the transparency to understand like how they're running their campaign, how they're making their decisions, how they're counteracting the news, how their relationships worked with news organizations. I mean, that was fascinating. So I had been kind of obsessively reading all of these WikiLeaks emails. Really, I possibly have some of my own selfishness because I wanted to understand, like, how does someone operate at that level? How do you run a presidential campaign? Like, you know, are the conspiracies true about the media being involved in manipulating, you know, how things really go on? And the proof was there in those emails.
You know what disqualifies you from being president?
What?
Wanting to be president.
Hey, that's a good point, though. So an analysis of mass information and data helped, you know, Trent see something in the future by understanding the past. You know, you sitting in the position you're at and having all this information come across your eyes every day over time, you know, how do you predict the future, or can you predict the future? I mean, you should be able to see trends and patterns moving forward.
Yeah, I would definitely like to get better at that, and it's something I have thought a lot about. And I mean, one of the small things when I'll see it, and it comes back to like what you were saying in the beginning about like getting ahead of news cycles, is, you know, success attracts imitators. And so as you look at like cool ideas, once one person writes about it and gets a couple readers, some of those readers, you know, start converting to writing the same thing. So, you know, like I saw like blockchain growing, you know, as HackerNoon a year ago-ish, you know, started blockchain, just more and more submissions coming in for blockchain. And, you know, as I learned more about it, I knew more and more were going to keep coming. You know, I knew not just that it was going to grow like as a technology, but also the type of people that were writing and the type of people that wanted to bet on it. I was, you know, you start to, and, you know, some of the Twitter analysis stuff and Twitter sentiment analysis gets really interesting, with different than me, but also very interesting of seeing where trends are going by identifying, you know, the influencer of the trend. And as influencers change their mind about technology or start talking about more technologies, you can kind of get a little bit ahead of knowing that a lot more people are going to write about it. But yeah, it is like, there is something about how I'm operating where like I really want to get as close to letting the market decide what news is. And I believe that if the community of writers just starts becoming very high quality people, they're going to choose the editorial line as a group better than I could as an individual. And this is different. All news organizations are subject to this at some level of what happens and what they choose to cover. But if you have your team of 10 writers, they know the editors and they know what stories they pitch will get taken, and they know what stories will pitch. They'll be accepted by the editors to then write on that story. So, and I don't really, sometimes some of the contributors are writing for me in the sense that they are changing the angle because it'll cater to me. And there's a part of that you can't get rid of, but I try to kill that incentive, and say to them, more on your shoulders, you're the expert, you take your take on it, you stand behind your take, and you write your take. And I think that ultimately produces, if anything, it's more honest stories. It's closer to what the person actually believes. Whether it's closer to the truth, I don't know.
No, that's true. I find myself writing for my peers constantly. There's people in my head from my history that I'm writing that, and I'm like, this person's going to read it. This person's not going to need to, and it's not for the audience, it's for my peers. And I was going to ask you, and you identified that yeah, you can even recognize that people are pitching to you because now you're kind of at a centralized boss man point, and they see you as a gatekeeper.
Boss man, it's at the end of the video game level. They finally make it through all of the internet. They make it to me.
And that's what I'm learning in these lessons of decentralization. And what you've done is you've decentralized, right? You've taken news from these major outlets, and now they're decentralized into a point where yourself and other influencers are now a multi-point, but still like choke points of news and information. And that's kind of like we're exploring, Trent and I, we look at decentralization and blockchain and holochain, stuff like that. And where are these nodes of centralization? And they're really important because that's where you can kind of monetize in these new systems, and they're going to be key influencer nodes, right? So do you have any kind of trends that you can kind of see in the next like weeks, months, days, years, or?
I'm definitely very excited to publish more about blockchain, more about artificial intelligence. I think artificial intelligence, we've done on HackerNoon, and we've had some great stories, but I think we're going to see artificial intelligence eliminate a lot of jobs in a lot of the customer service area. Like, looking at the technologies that can go to many industries is where I get a little excited about technology, because it's always great whenever, you can do it great in one industry. But whenever you have, some of it can be an illusion because you're like, oh, it could work anywhere on any type of business, which is like not true. But as you see it like get closer to that, you definitely want to put more into it. So, there's not exactly super specific answers there. But definitely answers I'm pretty excited about.
No, that makes sense. And machine learning is something I learned on HackerNoon. Somebody wrote an article, showed multiple data points going in and process, and I was like, oh, it's starting to make sense.
And I do like whenever I like publishing stuff of all the stuff about people documenting how they learned it, because then as the volume of that goes up, you can tell more people are learning it, and you're also teaching more people to learn it. And I always just like that point in like the learning development where you're documenting it early. You're not saying the problem's solved. You're saying, I have this framework and I started to learn how to apply it, and here are the choices I made. So I think that in that perspective of like, there's always with HackerNoon, there's a little bit of a unrefinedness. There's a little bit of always in progress that other blogs and news outlets are a little scared of, because it can come off as unprofessional. And sometimes it is a little traditionally unprofessional, but to me, it's more, hey, this process is being learned, like documenting while learning and documenting while doing, and you're getting closer to the perspective of the actual doer and maker. I find much more interesting than other news outlets. And I think it's people have responded by, wanting to read stuff like that. They don't care that like one author will do all caps in the headline and the other doesn't. And I allow that. And that's like crazy for a news outlet. Like, no, we are AP style. We are sticking to it. Whenever you report what happened, this is how you write the lead. Do not go with the lead and write your call to action to subscribe to my email. Never do that.
You're giving me journalism school flashbacks. Yeah.
I have degrees in creative writing and economics, so I never had like strict journalism. You know, to me, there is no objective. It's like everyone brings perspective, and that's part of the subjectivity that the story will have. And the idea that these newspapers are going along saying we're objective, it's just, to me, it's like, you know, you're biased in some way, and don't try and tell me you're not.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you said that, because one of my recent articles I put in there, I just put por ejemplo instead of for example.
Yeah.
You say, you know, sometimes in my head I'll just say por ejemplo, and I left it. I was like, and good point. You're not even stuck on English, you know.
Oh yeah, in our travel publication, Future Travel, I've basically allowed all languages. And my opinion was, hey, that's what travel's like. Sometimes you end up in a place and you don't speak the language.
No,
So,
yeah. Go ahead.
You.
I was just going to say, yeah, so this is shifting ideas of observation, right? So there's this natural law that, you know, the observer is the one who's important. And we've been working with the holochain guys, you know, doing this agent-centric computing, and, you know, now kind of revisiting how reality is shaped by the observer and how observation changes reality. And kind of like what you've done by decentralizing, allowing more observers to document their perspectives, is you're getting a more true look at reality, right? You can find it more than a less dictated reality, like, you know, something coming from a major news source. So I've, you know, as we're going through this, I'm starting to think, okay, yeah, you know, this is how power and influence is going to be shifted by creating content, and content creating forums. Right. And so these next level blockchains are coming out where, you know, the more you create and the more content you create, the more currency or value you're creating in that system. So you'll be able to push it through. And so I was like, wow. So there's this new kind of like equalizing medium coming out with this next level that, you know, probably taking what you've done with HackerNoon to the next level, where anybody can create and it can't be censored and won't even be, you know, needed an editorial process to start publishing and sharing. So
yeah, I haven't quite made that leap yet, and I've thought a lot about it, because, you know, you get into this area where it's a social network and the quality declines. So there is this thing of like always having one human read it before it goes out. Like, hey, if you're alone by yourself, maybe you need a second human before you publish. Like,
that is a good point.
That's kind of where I put the line in my head of like, because once you open it up, you know, then you could just quickly turn into a shitty MySpace of anyone publishing. And so it's, but at the same time, you know, you want to get the experts out there. So the one human rule is kind of one other human, I guess, another, you know.
That's really good. All right. I like that. One other human in some kind of publishing or editorial.
Yeah. Plus it shows you're capable of having a friend. You know, you're not so alone out there that no one wants to even read this before it goes out there. And you have to put it out there first and tag 50 people and send 50 emails to get your readers, you know. So
I usually have my girlfriend read everything before I publish it. She's my filter.
Very likable guy. You have one human ready to read it.
Well, sometimes like I get a little bit of anxiety before I hit that publish button sometimes. So like, because I write stuff that like I try to capture that collective, you know, that in moment consciousness, and I try to match that feeling to that moment. You know, that's why some of my articles are a little more emotional, and I like to capture that moment and share that it's authentic, and I think it gets across to the reader.
But authenticity, it can feel very risky. You know,
it's
putting a piece of yourself out there, and that piece of yourself out there isn't necessarily that same piece that you have tomorrow.
Exactly.
You know, that perspective can die. The feeling can be over, and you read it again, and you're like, why? Like, no, that wasn't me.
I get that feeling when I go back and read stuff all the time. I'll go back and read something I wrote like 10 years ago, and I was like, wow, I wrote this? Like, I had such a vocabulary back then. Like, I had to go use a thesaurus to look up words that I wrote 10 years ago. I'm like, what happened to me? What did I do to my brain?
No, that was a young ego.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me show my words. Hey, David, real quick question. So has any of are any publications off of your mediums, are all your outlets on Medium, can they be sourced, or have they been used in Wikipedia articles? You know that?
I think we have a couple Wikipedia links. We've been cited in a couple books actually with HackerNoon and emerging technologies, which was kind of cool. Like just stumbling upon Amazon and like doing some different searches. I was like, wow, you know, like this blog post 8 months ago is already in a book. A couple of those were like really exciting. Yeah, Wikipedia a couple. I mean, we had I think it was about 10 days ago, we had Investopedia cite us on Ripple, which was really cool. You know, they're like top 500 site. And, you know, every week we're in Google News of like, it hit a point about 4 months ago, where a lot of major outlets started picking up our most trending stories and writing commentary on them. So if you Google News search HackerNoon, you'll see all these outlets that are writing about us. And that was great. You know, it was validation of like, hey, if you put out a well-reasoned piece, you know, we're going to help get enough readers that some of them are writers for those sites and they're going to write about them, you know, and source them in there. You know, a couple mentions in Wired and stuff. That was like a nice validation moment. You know, and the Next Web was a lot of them. And then that turned into a partnership where we're publishing, you know, a trending story by each other on each of our sites, you know, once a week. And I've been starting to grow out that model. Next up, we have Fast Company, where we're going to be publishing their top tech leadership posts, and they're going to be republishing some of our trending tech stories. And I want to keep going down that route because it gives more value to contributing writers in the sense of like, hey, if you trend on HackerNoon, you get written about on Wired and you get republished in Next Web. So there's this idea of like the internet is gigantic and, you know, you got to keep looking for different types of ways to amplify the publish button. So I really like it from that perspective. And I also it's been nice of like, I want to work with sites I read, you know, and like, I want these guys to respect my site and read my site. Like media, there is a little bit of like, there's a brand perception that like as a media company grows, you have to battle and fight for and earn. It's something that you can't just like the quickest way to do it overnight is to take 50 million from someone's bank, you know? Oh yes, this new media company gets funded and they get all this credibility. And there is a credibility that comes with money that I don't have. You know, I've been doing it from the money it's a bootstrapped operation. The money we make is the money we put into it. You know, and that's how it grows. So there's a level of control to the growth that like, you know, I don't have like an artificial head start of seeding, you know, a ton of stuff. Where do we start this question?
No, and I'm seriously, because the idea, and I've been witness to some Wikipedia editing and sourcing battles, you know, actually more intense battles than I ever witnessed in the Pentagon about sourcing information. And Wiki does a decent job of trying to be a tertiary medium, meaning that somebody else wrote that went through a publishing criteria or process, and that process then validates it as, you know, a second source, and then Wikipedia being that third source. So the fact that you are a real editing process and there is that second eyes on, that's what it got me thinking, like that other human being checking out the work, putting it onto a medium. And I think that is the requirement Wikipedia needs for information to be put on there. So, you know, yeah, I was just wondering if anything gets published in HackerNoon, if we could source it into Wikipedia, and then that might actually bring more utility.
Yeah, I would like to do more of that in terms of citing Wikipedia and Wikipedia citing me. That especially when it like Ripple, Bitcoin, blockchain are so young that, you know, like we are one of the top sources on a new technology. You know, there's an element of like that it fits us better. But Wikipedia is like, they have the challenge I have, but instead of having it on one article, they have it on every word. Like it's literally a battle for each word in each sentence. That it's just like it's a very I've centralized the editing more than Wikipedia, you know, but you know, I haven't centralized it in the sense of like you have to go through the strict process to be a writer. You just have to send me something good and we publish it. You know, it's like there's not like the same on the scale of, traditional news organization and Wikipedia. I'm closer to Wikipedia, but on that scale, Wikipedia has another 100 levels of ability to be customized word by word and edited in real time word by word.
But the idea, and I love this quote by one of these wiki professionals, and I used to advocate, we had a kind of a wiki in Afghanistan, and the whole concept of flat information sharing is what I felt would help benefit everybody, right? We stopped, the quote in Afghanistan was, we haven't been in Afghanistan for 12 years. We've been in Afghanistan 12 times for 1 year, and then this idea of like spreading information out would have helped, deconflict a lot of like conflict. So I used to run around and just advocate. Nobody wanted to use it because, of course, there's a whole way people did things, and this isn't the way. But I used to say, and I don't remember the woman's name who said it, but she said, Wikimedia works in practice, not in principle. And I think that's kind of where you're coming up against this, that in practice, if anybody can just, publish on your site, anything, all their thoughts, it sounds like the Wild West of ideas. But in practice, it actually does resonate with very good expertise, a rich medium of information, and a cadre or a pool of really fresh and impactful information, and that should be validated. And there is value to it, and Wikipedia could value that and benefit, and humanity could benefit, because, like I said, if you can learn about machine learning quickly in this medium, that should be in a wiki article somewhere where more people would see it as well.
Yeah. When I get to thinking about too flat of information, though, it's the challenge of the next story and what you read next. Because every single time you go to read, you have a limited time frame. And that's why you see across, all these popular media sites, they're telling you the time to read the story at the top. You go to Fast Company, it's like 4-minute read, 3-minute read. It's like, because the time is the limiting thing of flat information, of how much you can then consume. And okay, once you make that assumption, knowing you have limited time to consume, you better value which story you choose next, and then you have some sort of process or reasoning to get to that next story. So suddenly you're in a situation where you have 1,000 stories, everyone has time to read 3, and everyone gets recommended the same second and third story. And that's where the danger of centralization becomes.
No, it's absolutely true. What are some of the trends you notice? Because you do have that kind of ticker, and I use it. I look at, do I have time to read this story? And, do you notice, is it the 1-minute stories that go? Is it the 3 minutes and the 12 minutes? Or
well, I do value the longer reads more, just because they have, they may not do as well tomorrow, but they'll do better over the year. And I like them because I value total time reading more than number of stories read.
Yeah, that's right.
We've published a couple. We've had a 51-minute read, and it was like the full history of Bitcoin, and it's a great resource. Like, it's in starter to intermediate level, and you can get very deep, and it helps a lot of readers in terms of, like, they come in on intro, or they come in on an advanced story, but then they want to kind of see where that fits in the whole landscape, and go to the 51-minute read and figure out the bigger history of Bitcoin. And I got a direct message the other day, and the dude was like, it was a 46-minute read about how to biohack your life with all these microdosing LSD and all these progressive types of Silicon Valley treatments. But the direct message was like, dude, I was on my lunch break and I wanted to read. I clicked on the headline, and then he does a little red circle on the 46-minute read, and he's like, what the fuck? And he just sends it to me. I'm like, it was good. Over a couple lunches.
No, and that's why I always tell people, I've read many economists, but I don't remember ever reading Time magazine cover to cover. And they're basically the same size publication, but I can read the Economist used to have a page and a half, and you can go through an Economist. For Time, I'm like, 7-page, I can't 7 pages.
Yeah, when I read The Economist, I'm always like, damn, they respect me. They're just they're telling me the situation. Sometimes you get a stronger opinion, and Time, now owned by Meredith Corporation, and you're like, you can take the strong opinion and just move on. As I don't know, tone is, a battle that's very different for me than a lot of other outlets and sites and publications and whatever you want to group together. Like, because as you're in the social network side of things, the tone is decided by the people you know, and you tend to know similar people and want to interact with similar people. And then on the other side of things, when you're the economist, you're literally training all your writers to write this way and imitate the past styles. And some of that happens on my sites because a lot of the writers are readers, and it creates this circle, but it's not the same as like, hey, I won't publish you when you break style. If you break style and you still produce quality around subject matter I care about, that's publishable. And to the economist, that's not. So that but it creates a more ambiguity in my tone where the leaders and the top contributors start to decide the tone in a rolling type of thing, which, with HackerNoon, it's been very interesting moving, because in the very first viral story of HackerNoon was what is it like to learn JavaScript in 2016? And it's a very funny piece going through, coming back into JavaScript and how complicated it's gotten. And it's very funny, and it helped attract a lot more humor, but then it also attracted a lot more serious people that wanted to talk about JavaScript. So as these different leaders and viral stories emerge, they basically start to get built around. And as they get built around, it's something that machines like Google can understand very well. As you get a couple viral leaders and then you build 100 stories around it, Google loves that. And it's much more clear to Google, which words you're an authority on. And then that creates, it's creating content and tone in a very rolling basis, and whatever works, it attracts more of what works.
Machine learning gets very excited when it finds a trend. That's basically how Google works is, they're using machine learning and they're using these algorithms to determine what is trending. So when you get different authors writing on the same topic, all of a sudden it goes, we found a trend, let's share this trend with the world. And that's kind of the model. That's the intention behind those algorithms.
And I'll let you guys in on one thing we have coming up. One of our contributors, he wrote this story of, I want to talk about Kevin. And Kevin is the bot he created. And as Kevin started to read more and learn more, here's what he did. And the writer wrote this great story contributing to HackerNoon, analyzing Kevin, making fun of Kevin for whenever he writes bad English, is he drunk? What's going on with Kevin? And now what we're going to do is we're collaborating to do @HackerInsights on Twitter. And it's an artificially intelligent bot that just reads HackerNoon articles and writes original tweets. So I'm basically having this artificial bot read all of our stories, and then it's going to be coming out with all these little tweets. And I've read all the early ones. And it's pretty funny. Sometimes he's on point, but sometimes machines aren't humans. And this one doesn't have the one human rule. We're going to let it live into the environment and see what it learns.
Is it the only of his type? Are there any other kind of bots out there expressing opinion?
There's a lot of bots. New York Times recently did a really good one about, bots in social media. And I don't want to go down.
Oh no, I know there's a lot of bots, but and they're posing as humans. I'm wondering if are there any advertised hey, this is what the robot is saying about what we're doing.
Yeah, we're being very blunt about it. We're calling it a HackerNoon bot experiment. We're being upfront, and that's how I want to do it. I don't really want any bot pretending to be a human. I don't want any part of that. Some people do. I don't know. It's not really interesting to me.
Well, you brought up AI earlier and how you think it's going to replace a lot of jobs, and I actually share a similar sentiment there. And then it also goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier as well, is how you can manage so many people over chat, and that's how AI is going to replace all these jobs. Is it's going to move to this chat interface where you're going to start talking to customer service agents over chat on Facebook and WhatsApp or whatever your instant messenger is. And have those conversations to resolve customer service issues. And it's going to be with a robot. You're going to be talking to one of these bots. You're going to be talking to the same kind of technology that our search engines are based off of to be able to resolve, whatever your customer service issue is. And that's coming. You're launching your own bot. Other people are launching their own bots. I've seen accounting companies and, all kinds of other automation services where, they're deploying robots to their salespeople and bots to be able to collect the information, do data allocation, all the stuff Salesforce does, be able to input that with a conversation with a bot. So, we're there. Like,
Yeah.
the technology is there where you can have a conversation now with a bot and, you know, be able to actually accomplish a goal. So it's a crazy time, and you're at the forefront of it with HackerNoon and all the people who write about machine learning and all these things. So, and it's fascinating when you take machine learning and combine it with the blockchain, because that's when we're going to see, there's going to be this moment in the future. I don't think it's quite happened yet, when all these blockchain solutions are going to get meshed with machine learning. And because the machine learning is going to be able to go in and analyze all that data on the blockchain and be able to come up with trends and conclusions and things that we can't even think about right now. You know, this is something that's coming, and it's not quite here yet.
Yeah, the optimist in me is like the small business owner and the startup founder. It's a lot easier to get and customize and set up 10 bots than it is 10 employees. You know, and there is something where it's like, okay, how high can we get the productivity of each worker?
Yeah.
You know, and with all this technology, can the productivity get high enough? It's like someone that used to not be very productive, and then you give them a lot of technology, or you frame it in the right way that they can use it, can become, you know, a very productive person. Can it reach the point where I can work 3 hours a day instead of 10? You know, or does it become the point where in 10 hours a day, I can publish 1,000 people instead of 10?
Yeah.
You know, so whatever I try to be an optimist about it, because I think there's too much, like, jobs that are being eliminated. Maybe that person should be spending their time better. You know, like the idea that jobs don't die is dumb, because then new jobs can't emerge. So I try and be pretty positive about it, but sometimes it is very sad, you know, and we're going to see it whenever the driverless cars are mainstream. That's going to it's going to become the de facto example on both sides of, you know, what happens when a job's automated. I mean, a truck driver right now, it's without a college degree, it's basically the best job. It's that middle best job. Like, the truck driver is a well-paying job that tons of people can get without a college degree. And it's something that won't be a job in 15 years, or not as common a job.
Yeah.
I mean, with the truck driver ones, there are more concerns of, like, if a truck driver fucks up, it's a lot more costly than if a cab driver fucks up. We shouldn't curse, should we? Is that bad for your audience? How disrupted are we? Disrupting language with curse words.
I mean, ultimately at this point, I think we're just kind of rolling with it. So, no worries.
I wanted to ask you guys.
Yeah,
I was listening to the other ones. The one thing, you know, that I come back to around, because I'm excited about, you know, decentralization and currency and other industries, but how concerned are you guys that people set up the wrong rules? You know, and that you could essentially create a blockchain that could be worse than the current system, you know, that's run by people, because the rules are poorly set up, and it just takes 10 years for someone to find the fatal flaw in the system that's going to affect everyone in the system. So I was kind of curious how you guys approach that in your business.
Yeah, I think that's a very big concern. I mean, ultimately, we've kind of had to take a step back with some of the projects we've been working on, and kind of almost encourage, you know, a hybrid approach, because ultimately we do not know or fully understand decentralization models yet. You know, this is uncharted territory. So, you know, at the same time, though, you can slowly kind of incrementally start to decentralize more and more. So what I mean by like a hybrid system is have some form of centralization using technology as we know it today, using systems as we know it today, and then optimize little components and, you know, modules of that with decentralization kind of slowly over time, so that you have the ability to iterate on it. That's kind of the approach that I'm seeing and taking, because I don't know where some of these systems are going to go. I mean, I've read a lot of different white papers on a lot of the different cryptocurrencies, and some of the models are pretty out there. And even for me, I'm struggling to wrap my head around them. You know, once you start getting into like quantum entanglement algorithms and like, you know, some really advanced math, like it's, you know, some of it starts to get even over my head. So, you know, there's definitely a concern that the intention of the system and then the rules that are made don't necessarily meet that intention. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a major challenge with all blockchain technology. That's going to be a major challenge with machine learning. That's already a challenge with Facebook. That's already a challenge with a lot of the social networks that we've created because they're optimized for advertising. What's interesting about your publication is you optimize for readership and quality and, a variety of opinions and being able to get multiple perspectives. But, most publications optimize for ad dollars. So the quality of their content suffers because of that. And that's why there's been an opportunity for someone like you to come in and kind of provide that quality gap that's missing for mainstream media. The rules do have an impact. And whether you're dealing with the blockchain or just building any kind of system, whether it's a business, whether it's an organization, whether it's just the rules that you even engage in with, one-on-one with another person to be able to, have a relationship or be a business partner or whatever it is. So there's definitely a concern that someone's going to try to implement the wrong rules. I mean, I'm looking at like the Lightning Network, for example, and I see an opportunity for the big banks to launch nodes and become the middleman for crypto transactions. And I'm looking at the Lightning Network going, hey, maybe this isn't a good idea. Maybe we do need a more decentralized solution, because basically what the Lightning Network does is introduce centralization to a decentralized system.
Which sounds very profitable.
It does sound very profitable.
A lot of they open it up and they centralize, or you open it up and suddenly you're back to the same model as the bank and taking a small piece on each transaction.
Exactly. So
David, go ahead.
Evil like that is going to happen, or profit like that is going to happen. That is a concern. So ultimately my hope is that people like us can write about this stuff on HackerNoon, talk about the social implications of it, talk about the ethics of it, and establish that framework now. Because we need to be thinking about the ethics of it now. We need to be thinking about how are we going to value things in the future, because all currency is fake. So
not gold, man. Gold. Keep all my money in gold. I go to the convenience store. I save off a little piece and I grab myself a LaCrux.
So, I mean, that's the thing is, since we're dealing in this world now where, numbers on a computer screen are supposed to be money, what does that actually mean? So, how are we supposed to actually value things? Is the representation of dollars to what we're actually getting in value for that on the other side, is it real? Is it tangible? So that's something crypto has to figure out and kind of start to overcome. Because it's a completely different asset class than anything else we've seen before. And it's built on belief systems, just like traditional currencies are. But it's almost got more in common with religion and that kind of belief system than it does anything else at this point. We're still in that kind of early cult phase, and it hasn't reached a critical mass yet. Grandma might know what Bitcoin is today, but that doesn't mean she understands it. And based on the stuff I've seen from even bankers, people in the finance industry, going on Bloomberg and, talking about cryptocurrencies, I mean, they just don't get it. They need to read HackerNoon because they just have no concept of, what is going on. They do not understand the technology. So, part of what we're trying to even do with this podcast is educate people on that. We just had an episode with a guy, who's got a government, alliance or association where he's trying to essentially educate governments on how they can use blockchain technology. So, by publishing that video, we now when someone Googles, blockchain and government, they might find that podcast and they might get an explanation from an expert, from someone who understands this, who's been at the forefront of this, who gets the technology to explain it to them. And that's critical because we're at that point right now.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add that I really like that it's easier for experts to put out a little more long form it's easier to put out long form on their opinions. That's something that's been very good to my business, and it's a trend that I'm a part of and riding, because it just used to be you get quoted as a source, reporter talks to you for an hour and they pull out a sentence. And that's a level of framing that like I'm not going to do, and it's just other publications are going to do. I'd rather publish the source's whole opinion and get closer to the whole source, and, let the reader pick which part of the source, which piece of the source they want to, gravitate towards.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And real quick, just to address, I wanted to quote one of my academic heroes, a guy named Bernard Fall. And he said, when a government's losing an insurgency, it's being outgoverned, not outfought. And that's what my answer to your question is there will be rules or blockchains or, efforts that do exclude people or subjugate, these are selfish tools that create value, and they may be not in line with everybody in the environment. So I'd say the ability to create competitive networks and competitive rule systems, and those better systems will outperform the bad systems. So hopefully, that's where we'll be, is we'll have more diagnostic rules, right? These rules will be open and transparent. And then if they don't fit for certain people, then people will be able to create different rules. And so,
the one I keep thinking about is the limit on the money supply of Bitcoin. I keep thinking about like, how is this going to change everything? Because it's like, money supply is just so important. And it's also like knowing that a limit is coming changes the way you behave now, as opposed to knowing a limit could change. And I don't have an answer to this. I just think it's one of the fascinating choices in the design of Bitcoin that made it so successful.
And Bitcoin is a money. I think that the real beauty of the tech is the ability to assign a digital, representation of value, and then we can set that value. And looking and seeing the world through a lens of value vice money, that's another enhancing or enriching kind of exercise, because the blockchain has helped me see more value than just straight money. And now as we bring, most humans have access to value and can create value. They can't all create money. So we're allowing people to now create value. And I think that's going to proliferate in the developing world among our most vulnerable, more so than Silicon Valley. And so as these systems need to be convinced to these people in Silicon Valley, I think as once they're just offered in the developing world, that they'll catch on much, much faster. So that's where we're going to see the proliferation. If I had to use my crystal ball, I'd say that India, Africa, these remote areas where the systems are super inefficient, that this new efficient system will proliferate faster.
Which is very scary to governments, the ones in power and the poor ones that are going to be now all their economic activity is happening not with their currency.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. And I'm hearing it in Africa already. Oh, are you planning on challenging our national sovereign? Yeah, I guess, but you'll be better off, trust me, when your people can pay taxes and their own infrastructure and, are getting paid to dispose of waste and make clean water. I can't even see the alternative. Like, we should stick with the status quo. Everybody was poor,
but we were equal.
but I was rich. That's where it's going to come. There's going to be people over there like it. But yeah, so the change will be fun. David, you're going to see a lot of this change play out, and you're
at the forefront of it. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You're at the tip of the spear.
Watch out. Don't say that too much. You guys are going to get me assassinated.
If you could only hope, you could only hope to live a life that somebody shoots you in your living room because of the ideas you proliferated. To your assassination.
No. Yeah, no, I mean, so what's really interesting about what you said, David, is, with Bitcoin, the way I kind of see it is I see it as this kind of like generation zero. And it gives us something to gauge everything else off of.
Yeah.
So I've
been framing it more like a mascot, but I like that generation zero framing. Yeah,
it gives us, because even mathematically, because there's a limited supply, we now know that, there's a limited supply. So now comparatively, when you compare that to any currency, whether it's another crypto or a fiat currency like the US dollar, what you're actually seeing is the fluctuation in value of these other currencies against that limited supply of Bitcoin. So it gives us a kind of economic tool we didn't have before, because basically the way the US dollar works is it's cyclical. The Federal Reserve is constantly raising interest rates and lowering them, and they're manipulating the currency and the supply by design. So you see these trends of how people are spending money at certain times during certain points in the year, and it's this pattern that they've kind of mastered over the last 80, 90 years, since the Federal Reserve has been in existence. And sometimes they screw it up. I mean, obviously that's what happens whenever there's a market crash. It's clearly not a perfect system. So now that we have some other form of measurement to like measure that against, it's like now we finally have a ruler that goes, oh, okay, this is what's happening with the US dollar. This is what's happening with the US dollar compared to, the yen or to the euro. And you have this other financial tool, this other asset class that you can look at that doesn't function the same way, but you can do comparative analysis and get an understanding of what's happening with these other economies and with these other currencies. So that's the way I see it. Do I think Bitcoin necessarily as a mechanism of trade in the future? Is it the one? Probably not. I think these second and third generation blockchains and cryptocurrencies are going to have new tools, new advantages, not waste energy, not, run GPUs into the ground, and not have the, some of the restrictions that proof of work and the current Bitcoin has.
So yeah, it's going to be exciting, and we plan on documenting it in one other place on HackerNoon. But yeah, so hey, what's the year look like for you? We're in February, and goals other than the bot and the the overt bot.
Well, my daughter's going to have her first birthday, so we're really planning big for that. Yeah. That's up there on my list of things. With HackerNoon, I want to get better at grouping stories, and what does that look like in terms of, because too often right now we're bringing people in and they're not getting recommended the right next story. And we're getting better, about how to do that. So I'm kind of excited in that area. I'm excited to grow out the editorial team and have, more public facing leaders that are accessible to people that want to contribute. And just looking at like what values I want to increase, the number of partnerships that we're looking at different media sites so we can grow the voice of our contributors and also, cross-pollinate audiences. And with the contributor, it's looking at, more ways to add value to them. And, whether we've done good work on amplifying the voice, but we need to do more work in terms of presenting opportunities that the voice creates. So, whether that's selling your tutorial, whether that's putting a 1-year ad on your story, whether that's going behind, the Medium paywall together and trying to increase readership amongst, these different paid communities. So I just want to get better at serving the contributing writer, and that there's a lot of different people that if you have 20,000 contributing writers, they have a lot of different goals. Some of them are concerned about getting money for the story. Some of them are concerned about getting leads for the story. Some of them, and most of them, are really concerned about getting readership. So, increasing readership and then what follows that is an area I want to get better at and present, more things to benefit the contributing writer.
Wow. Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. And congratulations on the success. And I know you published recently a graph showing how much your your viewership has gone up, and I was proud for you. And no, it is really good to watch this medium grow, and it's an informed place, and it's decentralized, and a place that a lot of leaders are coming through, and you're forming a lot of the next generation leader. So we appreciate the effort.
It's Absolutely. Cool, yeah, and it's cool to like help companies and contributors like yours get the voice out. It's like I show you a graph of what's happening, and that's because it's happening with 2,000 contributors, and you're two of them. The 2,000 careers are growing, so the more that I grow people's business and careers and, present these things, it's all better for me. And it's selfish, but it's also like, it doesn't happen unless I help a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a true free market of ideas. I appreciate it. So
Cool. I appreciate you guys having me on the show.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Make sure to brush your teeth.
yeah, good one.
And of course, people can find you where?
Oh, you can find me at HackerNoon, obviously. But on Twitter, it's at David Smooke. It's SMOOKE. On LinkedIn, it's /Clark Kent, like the alter ego of Superman.
How'd you get that one?
I like domains, you know. I grabbed it. Can you believe someone doesn't have Clark Kent on LinkedIn?
That's crazy.
People got to be more creative out there.
Well, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for publishing our work.
Cool. I'll talk to you guys later.
All right, man.